that talks about Lech Lecha. God comes to Abraham and says, I need you to travel, leave. And on that verse, the Medrash asks the question, when one is accepting the yoke of heaven, what it's referring to is one is saying the Shema, are they allowed to be walking? Can you walk? Can you do this? Shema Yisrael. While you're saying the Shema, take a little spatzir, a little walk. Can you drive? Can you be on a train? Or do you have to be stationary? That's the question. Interesting question. But they asked this question, remember, on the verse that says, when God comes to Abraham, he says, Lech lecha, get on the road, journey, travel, walk. And the answer is that you can recite the rest of the Shema while walking, while traveling. Just not the first verse. When you say that first line of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, everything should stop. Be stationary. No walking. And then, first paragraph, second paragraph, third paragraph of the Shema, obviously if you're in a shul and you're at the same place, that's great. But if you have to be walking, if you have to be traveling, if you have to be driving, that's fine. But that first line of Shema, stationary, same place. And that indeed became the law, part of code of Jewish law. If I get up in the morning and I'm running late and it's time to say the Shema, I should stop for those few seconds, put my hand over my eyes, say that first line of Shema, and then I can continue. Same thing with the evening, first line of Shema, stationary. Stationary could be sitting, stationary could be standing. You know, the old story, you guys probably have heard it numerous times. There was a congregation where when it came to saying the Shema in the shul, half the congregation stood and half the congregation sat. And the ones that stood started yelling at the ones that sat, get up, we're saying the Shema. The ones that sat started yelling at the ones that stood, saying, sit down, we're saying the Shema. This would go on every single davening, every prayer, this same fight. The rabbi's going out of his mind already. The guy is saying that you stand, say, tradition is, we always stand when it comes to saying Shema, out of respect. You know, there are prayers that we stand up for, right? On Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, how many times do you say, please rise, right? The ark is open, please rise, because these are lofty prayers. Well, the Shema is a lofty prayer, so please rise. The Amidah, please rise. And therefore, they said, in this congregation, we stand when we say the Shema. The ones that sat by Shema said, not so when it comes to Shema. In this congregation, for hundreds of years, they sat by the Shema, because the Shema is deep concentration. And deeper concentration is when you're sitting. The rabbi was new to this congregation. So everyone is saying, that's the way it always was. And he's going meshugah. So he gets together with the president of the board. And he says, we're going to have to resolve this. We're going to have to figure this out. I understand there is someone that's still alive. He's 110 years old. He's in some senior home. But he's from the original members of this congregation. I say we take one member of the delegation that says to stand, one member of the delegation that says to sit, and we go to him, and whatever he says, everyone is going to have to agree. That's the minhag of the shul. That's the tradition of the shul. And finally, it will be resolved. So the president of the congregation and the rabbi, and one fierce member of the sitting group, and one fierce member of the standing group, all go to the senior home. And indeed, there's this 110-year-old man there, and he still has his faculties in place. And they say, were you a member of this congregation when it began? Yes, I was. Well, we have a problem and we need you to resolve it. When we get to saying the Shema, there is a whole group in the congregation that stands and says, this is the way the minhag, the tradition of the shul is. And the man says, that's correct. So the fellow that believes in sitting says, that's not what I heard. I heard that when the congregation was open, they sat when they said the Shema? And he says, that's the way it was. So they both start screaming at the old man, how can it be? You said that they sat, you said that they sit. Which one is it? Because in our congregation, half are sitting, half are standing, they're screaming at each other, and he says, and that's the way it was when they first started the congregation. So some of our traditions go back a long way. Some of our traditions, that's just the way it's been. But whether you're standing or you're sitting, Shema in one place. Don't move around. The rest, you can take your walk. The question is, what's the difference between the first verse of the Shema and the rest of the Shema? If you can walk around during the rest of the Shema, why not by the first verse? If you can't walk around by the first verse, why not say that the entire Shema needs to be said stationary? Second question is, why is this question being asked in the book of Genesis when we're talking about Abraham? Should it not be asked in the book of Deuteronomy, which we are studying, which talks about the Shema? That's where this question belongs. And what's the connection with the verse of Lech Lecha? So as we say, did you do it, everybody? You know how to do that?
No.
Okay. I'm going to take a break. I got to teach Mr. Jacob. He's got to mute you guys because you're making noise. You are participants, and you do it all.
I'm glad you can. Me too. Good.
Guys, you got to be quiet in class, or you get in trouble. Okay. You good? Okay, we're back. We're learning. Okay, so what's the answer? As we said, the Shema is the moment we accept upon ourselves the yoke of heaven. When we remind ourselves that we're living in God's world, that we're living under God's control, that we're living under God's providence, that we're living in God's reality. That's what the Shema is about. That we're not these random creatures formed by some mistake, by some error, by some accident, but we're really all part of one singular creator who formed us and who formed the entire universe. Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, it's all one. The creator that made the flowers is the same creator that made me and you. One creator to all, no accidents, everything perfection. Who was the first human being that we can say accepted this yoke of heaven? That lived Shema? That's what he was. He was a walking, talking Shema that taught the world this concept. It was Abraham. And this Abraham is instructed by God with the very first communication, Lech Lecha, go forth from your land, go forth from your birthplace, from your father's house, to the land that I will show you. And all the families on the face of the earth shall be blessed through you. And the Torah continues to describe how Abraham called out in the name of God. Wherever he went, he spoke about God, belief in God. He was Shema. What Shema represents to us is how Abraham lived his life, teaching wherever he went the importance of belief in God, the unity of God, the unity of the universe and God. So with this commandment of Lech Lecha, Abraham begins to say and to breathe and to live and to teach the message of Shema Yisrael. That instruction puts him out there in the world. It's not enough that you live in your birthplace and you believe in God. You got a whole world out there. Lech Lecha, get out there in the world. So Lech Lecha is the first summons of God to a human being to depart, to leave the paradigm that he was used to and enter into a new one. It was the first invitation to man to internalize Shema Yisrael, their belief in one God, and spread it and teach it. And how? By Lech Lecha, by moving, by going forward. by departing one place, by traveling to another place. Now you understand. So the Medrash says, if the first teaching to the first Jew is Lech Lecha, go, am I to assume then that the real power of Shema is as you journey? Because I'm supposed to spread this teaching, just like God says to Abraham. That's why the question is asked right there. This is the first walking, talking Shema. And when it's being introduced to him, it's being introduced with the words, Lech Lecha, go. So maybe I should be saying the Shema as I walk, because the whole idea is to spread these teachings. Just like Abraham's Shema was defined by movement, by motion, by relocation, maybe our Shema should be the same. And on this, the Medrash answers, remember what the Medrash said? Not all of the Shema. The first line you should not say while moving, the rest you should. Because Abraham didn't accept the yoke of heaven when God came to him and said, Lech Lecha. At that point already, Abraham had accepted God. Now the mission was to spread the teaching. But it was already earlier in Abraham's life that he accepted God. He accepted God before this instruction. Lech Lecha was the second phase in the relationship with God. First phase, Abraham on his own accepts God. That's us saying Shema Yisrael. Second phase is now Abraham taking the message out. That's first paragraph, second paragraph, third paragraph of Shema. The messages of those paragraphs we need to take on the road. We need to teach that to the world. And the same, says the Medrash, is with Shema. The very first verse of Shema is about us first alone in our own mind, in our own heart, in our own soul, taking a moment to think deeply about our belief, our faith in the oneness of God. When I say oneness of God, that God created you and this whole world for a purpose. That you're not random. That your family is not random. Your community is not. It's all part of a master plan. It's all Hashem Echad. You stop for a moment before you begin your day and you focus on this. During that first line, the world must come to a stop. The rest of the Shema we can recite while we're moving. The Medrash is teaching us a fundamental idea in Judaism. The opening verse of Shema Yisrael must be said, internalized, and meditated when we're in a state of absolute stillness, when we're calm, when we're in a state of tranquility, and a state of immobility. During that verse, therefore, we don't walk, we don't move around, because if you're always on the run, it's hard to find God. If you're always on the run, you can't hear the inner still voice of your own soul. So for a few moments, literally seconds each morning, and a few seconds each evening, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, we stop everything. No phone, no texting, no WhatsApp, no email, no appointments, no rushing, no running, no moving, no worrying. And we declare with our full hearts, minds, and mouths, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. We are one, we're part of one, and our entire world is one. That we are living, breathing, functioning in this all-inclusive embrace of the divine. And our entire existence, all of the details of our lives, are encompassed by Hashem Echad, the oneness of the divine, who created us and gave each of us a mission to accomplish in this world. This is another reason why we cover our eyes when we say that first line. Because if you're looking around during the Shema, you get distracted by the universe. The universe is quite distracting. Because what we see is the opposite of oneness when we look at the world. Right? You see conflict. You see strife everywhere. You see it in our own psyche. You see it in our own homes. You see it in our workplace. You definitely see it in Washington, D.C. And you see it in the world. Conflict, strife, arguing, debating, fighting. You don't see the echad. You don't see oneness when you're looking at the world. So if you want to first focus on our faith of oneness, cover your eyes. Block it all out. Just for that one moment. Stop. Be still. Don't move. Close your eyes. Concentrate. Think that in the reality of all realities, it's all one. And it's the symbolizing the idea that before we gaze at the world, before we take our hand off our eyes and we look at the world, we needed to first be firm in our own faith of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Now you have that faith, now you can take on the world. Now you can take on the fragmentation of the world. And that's why we need to do this in the morning. We need to start our day with that frozen moment of inner peace and of unity. Don't move, cover your eyes, focus on that faith, focus on the oneness. Now you can go on. Only when Mashiach comes, it says, we will be able to recite the Shema without covering our eyes. Why? Because when Mashiach comes, the world won't be in conflict with the real mission of the world. We will have fulfilled the mission of the world. So we will see the world not in conflict with God's plan, but in unison with God's plan. You won't need to close your eyes and hide from the world for that moment. All of the world will be Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Once we have that moment, now we can be mobile. You see, Judaism doesn't embrace the vision of remaining your entire life in a motionless state. Our mission is to make the name of God beloved and known throughout the world. Through who? Through you. Not just through the patriarchs and matriarchs. To every single Jew that's been given, that's our mission. This course is called The Chosen People. That's what we're chosen to do. To bring blessings to all the families on the face of the earth. How? By teaching them that this is God's world, and this world has a plan, and this world has a mission, and this world has a purpose, and this world has a system of morals and ethics. What we do is we reveal the miracle in the natural. We're not just sitting back waiting for the supernatural miracle to happen. We look at nature and we say, that's the greatest miracle of all. We look for the extraordinary in the ordinary. We look for the holiness in the mundane, and we look for the God of heaven right here on earth. That's what we're looking for. So we don't stay stationary. We need that one moment of stationary inner thought, inner peace in the morning when we say the Shema, but now take the message out there. Where you work, be a walking, talking Shema Yisrael. Take the message of the morning and bring it to your workplace. Bring it to your home. Bring it to the business. Bring it to the stores. Bring it when you're shopping. Bring it when you go on vacation. Bring it to the world. This is an essential part of the story of the two early characters of the Bible. We had Noah, followed by Abraham. Think about it. Does anyone know what the name Noah means?
Manuach.
What does Manuach mean?
To rest.
Rest. Calm, right? Serenity. Abraham means a father of many nations. He's going to be active. Noah is going to be stationary. Abraham is going to be active. Noah to rest. Abraham to father many nations. For Noah, life is about tranquility. For Abraham, it's about changing the world. First comes Noah. First, there must be that moment of tranquility before you can change the world. If you don't have that first moment of that private Shema Yisrael, if you don't solidify your own faith, if you don't start and end your day working on your faith, you're not going to change the world. So first we have the first line of Shema, that internal deep meditation of your relationship with God. Once you have that, now we're like Abraham. Lech lecha. We got work to do. We have a mission to accomplish. And that's why the very first introduction of Abraham's name in the Bible is actually found at the end of the portion of Noah. At the end of the Noah, it tells us the genealogy of how from Noah we get to Abraham. But his name first appears at the end of the portion of Noah, because even in Abraham's life, there needed to first be that Noah element, up until he was 75 years old, when he's working on his own faith, which is represented by our first line of the Shema. Once he reaches that point, now God says, Lech lecha, go out there and change my world. Because once we have that, we can navigate the elements. So first we say the Shema immobile, and then we become quite mobile. That same word of Noah, which means rest, can also allude to a sense of rest and calmness that we experience, we as Jews experience, before we take on the world. That same system that I just described to you, at first we need the Shema, that first moment of tranquility, and then we can take on the world. If you really look at the theme of Judaism, that's the way God set up our week as well. Don't look at Shabbat as the end of the week. Think of Shabbat as the beginning of the next week. First, you start with that day of tranquility. Because if you start with Shema, if you start with Shabbat, the rest of the week that follows, you'll be fulfilling, bringing the blessings to all the families on the face of the earth. Because you will be solid in your mission. You will be secure in your mission. You'll have that serenity in your mission. Senator Joseph Lieberman, I'm sure you're all familiar with, published a book. The name of his book was not about politics. The name of his book was The Gift of Rest, Rediscovering the Beauty of Shabbat. If you haven't read this book, you should get Lieberman's book on Shabbat, because it's great coming from a politician to talk about the gift of Shabbat. Anyone remember when he was nominated to be Gore's running mate, how the media hounded him with Shabbat questions? They hounded him with, what are you going to have to do if there's a war and it's Shabbat? What are you going to have to do if there's a crisis, if there's Shabbat? What are you going to do? I think the question was, the inauguration was supposed to be on Saturday. What are you going to do? Are you not going to go to your own inauguration? But that they were just going crazy with this idea that a human being could say on one day a week, I'm unreachable. And he had his rabbi handle a lot of these questions of when it's halachically permissible. If it's a war, it's pekuach nefesh, he would be allowed to, on and on and on. But the fascination that everyone had with Lieberman and Shabbat was all over the news. So he ends up writing a book called The Gift of Rest, Rediscovering the Beauty of Shabbat. And he writes this in his book. People have always asked me, how can you be a senator and observe the Sabbath? I say to them, the question is the other way around. How can one be a senator and not have the gift of Shabbat? You're asking it from the wrong way. The only way you can be a senator, the only way you can be so involved in the political warfare that goes on and what takes place in the United States Senate, is if you have that one day of peace and tranquility. One day to really think of, who am I? What do I represent? What's my mission in this world? What are my priorities? Without there being any hollering, without there being any lobbyists in my office, without there being any email or texting or cursing me out, without there being any media hounding me, I had Shabbat. I had that peace. I was able to think. And then I can take on the week. Is he not saying the same, I had my Shema Yisrael moment? Shh, the world stops, I don't see the world. And now I can go on with the first paragraph, second paragraph, third paragraph of the Shema. I can go on with my life. It used to be, when you had a job at your office, you got a letter, you got a package, and you got this proposal in the mail. When I say used to be, I'm not talking about the olden days, whatever the olden days used to mean. I think of always the olden days, like my grandfather's parents were the olden days. When I first started working, we didn't have fax machines.
Really?
Right? Fax machines. I was in Boston in 1980. That's why I was in yeshiva in Boston. And they showed me this concept that you could put one letter on one wheel and another blank page on another wheel, and if it spins, what's showing on one paper can come out on the other. It was the beginning of the fax machine idea. And then when I heard that you can actually take a paper here and it comes out over there, think about it. It was mind-boggling. How is that possible? The paper is still here. How is it in your office too, right? And then I said, I would have thought by now they figured it out, is can you fax me a donut? And soon they're going to have those drones are going to be flying. You're going to get a donut, give me with sprinkles, give me an ice cream cone with the black chocolate sprinkles and food, and a fly, drop off right into your house, into your hand, it'll be there. Mirz Hashem, your grandchildren will have everything just by the snapping of the finger. But it's taken a long time since 1980 till the year 2021, and we still can't fax a donut. Most of us don't even have fax machines in our offices anymore. Right? But we used to get a proposal in the mail, right? If it was really important, they FedExed it, right? They UPS'd it. And what did you do? You got the proposal, you read it, then you gave it to your attorney to read. You either sent a courier to your attorney, which took a day, or you FedExed it or mailed it, or you had a board meeting to discuss it, which took a week to schedule, and by the end of the month, there was a response to the proposal. That's the way life was. Then came express mail, and there was no such thing anymore of just waiting for 6 days for a letter to come. Right? And FedEx came up with the idea that you can say you'll be there by 10 a.m. That changed everything. Because now by next morning you will have it on your desk. Then came the fax. And so now you need a response by day's end. And then came email. I'm sure you each remember the first time you were exposed to this idea of email. Wow, you got mail. Right? AOL was the first one, right? Tell you this every single time you got an email, it announced it to the world. It was a big thing. You got 3 a day, it was big. Now you get 6,000 a minute. Then came texting. And now the response is expected even before the fellow finishes sending the text. They're expecting to see your 3 dots that you're responding. And if you don't respond within the first 5 seconds, what's wrong? He doesn't like me. What's he angry at, right? You go through this mentality that there's the expectation of an instant response. That's what the workplace has turned into right now. As someone once called it, today we live in the age of interruption. There's no such thing as inner time anymore. Your time is controlled by others. Everyone is grabbing at some of your time. Everyone is grabbing at some of your attention. And the demands of society is something we can't keep up with anymore. Because your time schedule is now defined by others. It's not defined by you yourself anymore. You sit down to a cup of coffee and just think, relax and think about life, and there's already 20 text messages and 40 emails waiting for you. It used to be lunch break was a lunch break. It's not a lunch break anymore because you have your cell phone with you. So your phone is ringing the entire time. Go into any restaurant, deli, wherever it is, pizza shop in the world, and everyone is on their cell phone. So no one's really relaxing for lunch anymore. That doesn't exist. In New York, you used to take the subway to work, right? You would sit down and you would read a newspaper, right? Relaxing time, right? There's not a single person with a newspaper on the subway in New York. Every human being is there with their phone. Every single one. It's all changed. You don't control your time anymore. So the faster we go, the emptier we feel. The more we get done, the less we get accomplished. Because it's happening so fast. Along comes this contribution said to us thousands of years ago, this gift that God gave us thousands of years ago. And it's called Shabbat. It's this island in time where we leave the buzz behind. Don't look at the computer. You don't look at the cell phone. You put it away. You don't even follow the news. Put it all away. You see, there are things that are urgent in life, and then there are things that are important in life, and they're not necessarily the same list. Urgent is what someone's telling you, I need an answer from you right away. But it may not really be important. Important is inner time. Time that is yours, that's really yours. Not governed by external pressures, not governed by others, but by this inner rhythm of life, of your life. The first great principle of time management is to distinguish between those two lists of urgent and important. What's urgent in your life? What's important in your life? And figure out how you want to divide the time between the urgent list and the important list. Shabbat is time dedicated to important, not urgent. Spending time with your spouse and with your children, with your family and with guests, it's not urgent, but it's important. Sharing a meal, enjoying how you're discussing how the week was, it's not urgent, but it's important. Shabbat used to be a time when my father would go around the table and he would ask each of us what we learned in school that week. Why? Because all week long my father was busy with the urgent. He kept 3 jobs to keep up with the family. Everything was urgent. The calls would come in, this office, this office, this office. Shabbos was what's important. And so he had the time to speak to each of his children and to say, what are you learning? What did you learn this week? And after the grace of meals were over, he would sit down by the table and we each had our turn to sit with my father with a Talmud open and he would review what we studied that week in yeshiva. If we were younger, then it was with a chumash. That wasn't urgent. It wasn't pressing, but it was important. On Shabbos, we're not trying to change anything. We're not trying to generate more money. We're not trying to conquer any more territory. We're not trying to be successful. We're not trying to be somewhere else. On Shabbos, our world stands still, calm, noach, serenity for that 24-hour period. During that time, the marathon ceases. No deadlines to meet, no pressure to carry, no appointments to confine us. For that one day a week, it's just Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. It's me, it's my God, it's my family, it's my community. It's the true us. Not the us the world demands of us, but the real inner us. So imagine the feeling where your cell phone can't disturb you all day, that no one can bother you, that you're really unreachable, and you spend that day with yourself. In her book, My Grandfather's Blessing, author Rachel Riemann writes about visiting her grandfather's house every Friday afternoon after school. And she writes that he would light candles, he would say a few words of prayer, he would finish talking to God, he would then turn to me, his granddaughter, he would rest his hands lightly on the top of my head, and he would bless me. And he would say, thank you, God, for making her my granddaughter. I was 7 years old when he passed away. I have never forgotten every Friday hearing my grandfather say, thank you, God, for making her my granddaughter. It has stayed with me every single day of my life. And this is why she, in her life, writes, she has to get that Shabbat. She has to find it in her life. Because there was nothing so real, nothing so pure, nothing so meaningful in her life other than those few seconds. For hundreds of generations of Jews, Shabbat was always the epicenter of the Jewish week. And it's what we look forward to. As I say, there's two different ways of looking at Shabbat. The end of a long, hard week, we could relax. Or the day I need to focus on self in order to go out next week into the grind of the world. This same concept that I began with, of the first sentence of Shema and the rest of the Shema, is the same thing, of Shabbat and the rest of the week. I want to close with, as I mentioned, Senator Lieberman. I'll close with this and we'll come back to this theme next week. The lives of most people these days are connected 24/7 to the BlackBerry. I guess when he wrote it, BlackBerry was still in business. iPad and cell phones.
Still in business.
Hey, someone's got a BlackBerry.
Oh my God.
One of the most important things I would encourage people to do would be to turn off all their electronics for a day or part of one. Let people experience what a liberation it is. Another thing would be to have a family meal and dress it up and make it important and special as observant Jews try to do every Friday night and Saturday. The third thing, which is even a little more explicitly religious, is to follow the tradition we have of blessing our children. It has a lot of meaning for the children to tell them how important they are to us and for us to tell us what a blessing our children are. It also reminds us that we have the capacity to bless something a lot of people think is just reserved to rabbis, pastors, and priests. And he concludes his book about Shabbat. We'll continue next week on this theme of Shabbat and then bring it right into the meaning of the actual second paragraph of the Shema. Have a wonderful week, everybody, those in front of me and those throughout the world on Zoom and those that will watch later on YouTube. You should have a wonderful week and a Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you.